The dust of Ash Fork never truly settled. It hung in the air like a permanent veil, coating everything: the weathered storefronts, the horses tied to hitching posts, and the souls of those who called this godforsaken corner of Arizona territory home. Marshal Ethan Cole stood on the wooden boardwalk outside his office, watching the late afternoon sun paint the desert red through that eternal haze. He'd been watching this town for 3 months now, ever since the county appointed him temporary marshal after old Jim Brennan caught a bullet in his gut during a saloon brawl. 3 months of keeping peace in a powder keg where cattlemen, miners, and the old Mexican families who'd been here since before the Gadsden Purchase eyed each other like rattlers in a box. Ethan shifted his weight, feeling the familiar ache in his left shoulder where Confederate grape shot had found him at Chickamauga 15 years back. The war had ended, but some wounds never stopped reminding a man of what he'd done to earn them. He pulled a tobacco pouch from his vest pocket, his movements slow and deliberate, the kind of careful motion that kept men alive in places where sudden gestures meant gunplay. Marshal Cole. The voice came from his left, soft but carrying that particular quality that made men stop and listen. Ethan didn't need to turn to know who it was. Lydia Hart had that effect. Her presence announced itself like distant thunder, full of promise and peril. "Miss Hart," he acknowledged, finally turning to face her. She stood there in a dress of deep burgundy that had seen better days, but still managed to catch the light in ways that drew the eye. Her dark hair was pinned up in the fashion of Eastern ladies, though the desert wind had pulled loose a few rebellious strands. At 28, Lydia carried herself with the bearing of someone who'd learned young that the world was full of wolves, and showing weakness only encouraged them to bite. "I wonder if I might have a word," she said, glancing around the nearly empty street. Most folks were inside, avoiding the day's dying heat. Ethan gestured toward his office door. "After you." The marshal's office was sparse, a desk scarred by years of use, 2 chairs that creaked with every shift of weight, a rifle rack on the wall, and a pot-bellied stove that would become their best friend come winter. Lydia settled into the visitor's chair with practiced grace, while Ethan took his place behind the desk. "Coffee," he offered, gesturing to the pot that perpetually simmered on the stove. "That tar you brew, I'll pass." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Though I appreciate the courtesy." Ethan poured himself a cup of the mentioned tar and waited. In his experience, folks talked when they were ready, and pushing only made them close up like morning glories at nightfall. "There's going to be trouble," Lydia finally said, "tonight, at the Silver Dollar." The Silver Dollar Saloon was where Lydia sang most evenings, her voice drawing men from miles around. It was also where most of Ash Fork's trouble started, fueled by whiskey and the peculiar madness that seized men when they thought they had something to prove. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that starts with Baron McKendry's boys making threats and ends with someone bleeding on my stage." Her hands, folded in her lap, showed white knuckles. "Tom Garrison's been drinking since noon, talking about how singers from St. Louis got no business taking honest money from working men." Ethan knew Tom Garrison, one of McKendry's cowboys. Mean as a stepped-on rattler when sober and worse when drunk. Baron Silas McKendry owned the largest cattle operation in 3 counties and had a way of making sure his men's troubles became everyone's troubles. "I'll have Deputy Little keep an eye on things," Ethan said. "Will that be enough?" Lydia met his gaze directly, those green eyes holding shadows he couldn't quite read. "Your deputy's all of 19 and still flinches when guns come out." It was true. Nate Little was eager and loyal, but green as spring grass. Still, he was what Ethan had to work with. "I'll be there myself." Something shifted in Lydia's expression: surprise, maybe, or something more complicated. "You don't frequent the saloons much. Marshal, people notice that sort of thing." "People notice a lot of things in this town." Ethan took a sip of his coffee, grimacing at the bitter taste. "Doesn't mean they understand what they're seeing." A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sound of hammering from the blacksmith's shop. and the creak of wagon wheels on the main street. "Why warn me?" Ethan asked. "You could have handled Garrison's type before. What's different about tonight?" Lydia stood, smoothing her skirts. "Because I've got a feeling tonight's trouble is meant to be more than just trouble. Call it woman's intuition. Or maybe I'm just tired of cleaning blood off my shoes." She moved toward the door, then paused. "You were Union, weren't you, during the war?" The question caught him off guard. "I was. Garrison's been going on about that too. Says this town's got no business being run by a bluebelly who probably shot good Southern boys in the back." She opened the door, letting in a blast of heat and dust. "Just thought you should know what kind of talk is going around." After she left, Ethan sat in the gathering dusk, finishing his coffee and thinking. Ash Fork was balanced on a knife's edge, had been since the railroad announced plans to run a spur line through the valley. That meant money, and money meant power struggles. McKendry had been content to run things his way when Ash Fork was just another dusty waste station. But now, with progress coming on steel rails, the stakes had changed. He checked his Colt .45, making sure it sat easy in the holster, then grabbed his hat from the peg by the door. Time to find Nate and prepare for whatever the night might bring. The Silver Dollar Saloon squatted on the corner of Main and 2nd like a gaudy jewel in a tarnished setting. Even before full dark, the place was filling up with cowboys, miners, and townsmen looking to wash away the day's dust. Ethan found Nate Little standing nervously outside, trying to look authoritative despite his Adam's apple bobbing like a fishing cork. "Marshal," the young deputy said with obvious relief. "Miss Hart said there might be trouble." "There might be." Ethan studied the saloon's bat-wing doors, listening to the mix of voices, laughter, and clinking glasses within. "You ever been in a real gunfight, Nate?" "No, sir." The boy's honesty was one of his better qualities. "Then let's hope tonight's not your first. Keep your hand away from your gun unless I draw mine. Watch the crowd, not just the troublemakers. Sometimes it's the quiet ones who move first." Ethan adjusted his own gun belt. "And Nate, if shooting starts, don't try to be a hero. Heroes get buried young out here." They pushed through the doors into a wall of smoke, sweat, and noise. The Silver Dollar was packed, men 3 deep at the bar and every table full. At the far end, on a small stage that had seen better days, Lydia Hart was setting up for her performance. She'd changed into a dress of midnight blue that caught the lamplight like deep water. Ethan spotted Tom Garrison immediately, hard to miss him, big as he was, holding court at a table near the stage with 4 other McKendry men. They were well into their cups, voices loud and gestures expansive. One of them, a ferret-faced man named Doyle, was handling his pistol, spinning it on the table like a deadly toy. "Trouble," Nate whispered. "Not yet," Ethan replied, guiding them to a position along the wall where they could watch the room. But soon, the crowd quieted somewhat as Lydia began to sing, her voice rising clear and true above the ambient noise. She had a gift. No denying it could make hardened men think of home and mothers and sweethearts left behind. For a few minutes, even Garrison's table fell silent. It was during her 3rd song, a ballad about lost love that had half the room misty-eyed, that Garrison made his move. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor, and called out, "Why don't you sing us a real song, woman? Something honest folks can appreciate, not this St. Louis parlor trash." The music stopped. Every eye in the place turned to watch what would happen next. Lydia, to her credit, didn't flinch. "I take requests. Mr. Garrison, what would you like to hear?" "How about you stop pretending you're better than the whores upstairs and come have a drink with real men?" Garrison's friends laughed. Ugly sounds in the sudden quiet. Ethan pushed off from the wall, moving through the crowd with the Nate trailing behind. He positioned himself between Garrison's table and the stage, hands visible but ready. "Evening, Tom," he said conversationally. Enjoying the show? Garrison's bloodshot eyes focused on him with difficulty. Well, if it ain't the Union Marshal. Come to protect your songbird. Come to keep the peace. Miss Hart's entitled to earn her living without harassment. Harassment? Doyle spoke up, still fiddling with his pistol. We're just being friendly. Ain't that right, boys? The other men at the table muttered agreement, hands drifting toward weapons. The temperature in the room seemed to drop despite the press of bodies. Here's what's going to happen, Ethan said, voice carrying to every corner of the saloon. You boys are going to finish your drinks, pay your tab, and head back to the McKendry spread. Tomorrow, when you're sober, you can come back and apologize to Miss Hart for your poor manners. Like hell, Garrison snarled. Standing to his full height, he had 3 inches and 40 pounds on Ethan. No bluebelly tells me what to do in my own town. This isn't your town, Tom. It belongs to everyone who lives here, cattlemen, miners, merchants, and yes, singers from St. Louis. Ethan kept his voice level, but his hand had dropped to hover near his coat. Now, I asked nicely once. I won't ask again. The moment stretched taut as piano wire. In the absolute silence, the click of Doyle cocking his pistol sounded like a thunderclap. Then several things happened at once. Doyle raised his gun not at Ethan, but toward the stage where Lydia stood frozen. Ethan's Colt cleared leather faster than thought, the motion pure instinct honed by 4 years of war and 15 of survival. His shot took Doyle in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his own shot wild into the ceiling. Garrison lunged forward, going for his own gun. Nate, bless him, stepped in with the butt of his rifle, catching the big man in the solar plexus and dropping him wheezing to his knees. The other 3 McKendry men had their hands halfway to their weapons when Ethan's voice cut through the chaos. Don't first man to clear leather joins Doyle on the floor. For a heartbeat, it could have gone either way. Then, slowly, hands moved away from gun butts. The crowd, which had pressed back against the walls at the first shot, began to breathe again. Doc Avery, someone called. Doyle's bleeding bad. The town's elderly physician pushed through the crowd, medical bag in hand. He knelt beside the wounded man, hands already working to stem the blood flow. He'll live, Doc announced after a moment, though he'll be favoring that arm for a good while. Ethan kept his gun drawn but pointed at the floor. Nate, collect their weapons. Garrison, soon as you can breathe again. You and your boys are spending the night as guests of the town. We'll sort this out in the morning when everyone's sober. As the McKendry men were disarmed and let out, Baron McKendry himself pushed through the bat-wing doors. He was a small man who made up for his stature with expensive clothes and an attitude that expected the world to step aside when he walked. His pale eyes took in the blood on the floor, his groaning foreman, and Ethan's still-drawn pistol. Marshal Cole, he said, voice smooth as oil on water. I trust there's an explanation for why my men are being treated like common criminals. Your man drew on an unarmed woman, Mr. McKendry. That makes him exactly a common criminal. McKendry's gaze flicked to Lydia, who still stood on stage, pale but composed. I see, and naturally you took the word of a saloon singer over respectable ranch hands. I took the evidence of my own eyes. Your men had been drinking and making threats. When asked to leave peacefully, they chose violence instead. That's one interpretation. McKendry straightened his string tie. I wonder what Judge Hancock will make of it when he arrives for the monthly circuit. After all, a marshal who shows favoritism to certain elements might not be the best choice for a town trying to attract railroad investment. The threat was subtle, but clear. Judge Hancock was a known associate of McKendry's, and the railroad committee would be looking for any excuse to put their money elsewhere. I enforce the law equally, Ethan said. That's not going to change. We'll see. McKendry turned to go, then paused. Oh, and Marshal, You might want to ask yourself why Miss Hart was so certain there'd be trouble tonight, almost as if she was expecting it. He smiled, a cold expression that never touched his eyes. Just something to ponder. After McKendry left, the saloon slowly returned to its normal rhythm, though subdued. Men ordered drinks and spoke in lower voices, casting glances at the bloodstain on the floor that the swamper was working to clean. Ethan holstered his Colt and made his way to the stage, where Lydia was gathering her music sheets with hands that trembled slightly. "You all right?" She nodded, not trusting her voice immediately. Then, "Thank you. When Doyle pointed that gun," she shuddered. "McKendry seems to think you knew this was coming. I told you I had a feeling." She met his eyes, defiance flickering there. "Since when is intuition a crime?" "It's not, but if you know more than you're saying, now would be the time to tell me." Lydia was quiet for a long moment, then shook her head. "I've learned to read men like Garrison. When they start talking about teaching someone a lesson, it usually ends badly. That's all. Ethan studied her face, looking for tells. But Lydia Hart hadn't survived this long by being easy to read. "If that changes, you know where to find me." She nodded, then surprised him with a small smile. "You're fast with that iron, Marshal. Faster than I expected from someone who favors coffee over whiskey. Speed's not always the answer, but sometimes it's the only one that keeps people breathing." He touched the brim of his hat. "Evening, Miss Hart." As he walked back to the jail to check on his prisoners, Ethan found himself thinking about McKendry's parting words. There was more to tonight than a simple saloon confrontation. He could feel it in his bones. The same instinct that had kept him alive through 43 battles and countless skirmishes. Ash Fork was changing, and change always brought blood. The question was how much, and whether he could keep it from drowning the whole town. In the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon, and the desert wind whispered secrets through the empty streets. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles, but tonight, at least, everyone was still breathing. In a town like Ash Fork, sometimes that was the best a man could hope for. The morning after the saloon incident dawned hot and unforgiving. Like most mornings in Ash Fork, Ethan sat at his desk, nursing his third cup of coffee and staring at the telegram that had arrived an hour ago. The words seemed to mock him from the yellow paper. "Railroad Committee demands immediate report on town stability. Investment decision pending. H. Whitmore, Southern Pacific Railroad." A knock interrupted his brooding. Nate stuck his head through the door, looking fresher than any man had a right to after a night of guard duty. "Judge Hancock's here early. Marshal, he's at the hotel, wanting to convene court this afternoon." Ethan set down his cup, so McKendry hadn't wasted any time. "Tell him I'll present the charges at 2 o'clock. After Nate left, Ethan stood and walked to the window. Main Street was already busy, merchants opening shops, wives heading to market, children dodging between wagons. Peaceful enough on the surface, but he could feel the tension underneath, like a held breath. The door opened again, and this time it was Reverend Josiah Hale who entered without invitation. The minister was a tall, austere man who wore his righteousness like armor and wielded scripture like a weapon. Marshal Cole. Hale began without preamble. "I've come to discuss the moral decay that's spreading through our town." "Have a seat, Reverend." Ethan didn't return to his desk, preferring to lean against the wall where he could see both the door and window. Hale remained standing. "That woman, that entertainer from the saloon, she's a corrupting influence. Last night's violence is proof of that." Last night's violence came from drunken cowboys, not Miss Hart. "She incites them with her presence, her display." Hale's thin lips twisted. "A decent woman would find honest work, not parade herself before men weakened by drink and loneliness." "She sings, Reverend, nothing more." "Nothing more?" Hale's voice rose. "She leads them into temptation, and now I hear you defended her, shot a man for her. What message does that send? Ethan straightened from the wall, letting his full height make its point. It sends the message that in this town, nobody draws on an unarmed person without consequences. That's the only message I'm interested in sending. Hale's face reddened. The town council will hear of this. We're trying to build a respectable community here, attract families and businesses, not protect fallen women who... Careful, Reverend. Ethan's voice had gone quiet, which those who knew him recognized as dangerous. You're about to say something unchristian about a woman you barely know. The two men stared at each other until Hale finally looked away. Mark my words. Marshal, that woman will bring nothing but trouble, and when she does, the blood will be on your hands. After the minister stormed out, Ethan sank into his chair and rubbed his temples. The headache that had been building since dawn was now pounding in earnest. He was reaching for the coffee pot when the door opened yet again. This time it was Dr. Avery, looking tired but determined. The elderly physician had been in Ash Fork since before it had a name, and his opinion carried weight with everyone from ranch hands to mine owners. Ethan, he said, settling his considerable bulk into the visitor's chair. We need to talk. If it's about Doyle, I aim for his shoulder. He'll heal. It's not about Doyle. Avery pulled out his pipe but didn't light it, just held it for comfort. It's about this town and the precipice we're standing on. The shooting last night was just the beginning. What have you heard? McKendry's been meeting with the other big ranchers. They're worried about the railroad bringing in farmers, changing the balance of power. They want to make sure Ash Fork stays cattle country. Avery tapped his pipe against his palm. And they see Lydia Hart as a symbol of everything they're fighting against Eastern influence. Change. Women who don't know their place. She's one singer in one saloon. She's an unmarried woman making her own way, speaking her mind, and not apologizing for it. To men like McKendry and Hale, she might as well be carrying a revolutionary banner. Ethan stood and paced to the window again. What are you suggesting, Doc? I'm suggesting that you need allies. The town council meets tonight, and they'll be discussing whether to demand your resignation. McKendry's been spreading money around, making sure the vote goes his way. Let them vote. The county appointed me, not the town council. True, but if the railroad pulls out because of instability, the county will bow to pressure faster than you can say political expedience. Avery finally lit his pipe, filling the room with cherry-scented smoke. There might be another way. I'm listening. Marry the girl. Ethan turned so fast he nearly knocked over the coffee pot. What? Think about it. Half the town's upset because they see her as a loose woman. The other half's upset because they think you're playing favorites. Marriage would solve both problems, make her respectable. Prove you're invested in community values. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Is it? Avery puffed thoughtfully. You're 35, never married. She's 28. Same situation. Both outsiders trying to make a place here. It's practical. It's insane. I barely know her. You knew her well enough to risk your position defending her. Avery stood to leave. Just think about it, Ethan. Sometimes the craziest solution is the only one that works. The afternoon court session was a farce, as Ethan had expected. Judge Hancock, a small man who seemed to shrink further into his black robes, listened to the charges against Garrison and the others with barely concealed impatience. Marshal Cole, Hancock said after Ethan finished his testimony. It seems to me this was a simple misunderstanding that got out of hand. These men had been drinking, perhaps said things they didn't mean. One of them drew a weapon on an unarmed woman. Your Honor. So you say, but Mr. Doyle claims he was merely adjusting his holster when you shot him. With respect, Your Honor, I know the difference between adjusting a holster and drawing with intent. Hancock's eyes narrowed. Are you questioning my judgment, Marshal? No, sir, just stating facts. The judge deliberated for less than 5 minutes before returning his verdict, charges dismissed. Time served. with a warning to avoid future misunderstandings. As the McKendry men filed out, Garrison paused beside Ethan. "This ain't over, Bluebelly," he muttered low enough that only Ethan could hear, not by a long shot. That evening, Ethan found himself standing outside the Silver Dollar again, but this time he hesitated before entering. The weight of Doc Avery's suggestion sat heavy on his shoulders. Marriage. The word felt foreign in his mind, like trying on clothes that didn't fit. Inside, Lydia was preparing for another performance. The crowd was smaller tonight. Word of the previous evening's violence had kept some away, but those present seemed subdued, watchful. "Marshall," she greeted him, surprised. 2 nights in a row, people really will talk. "Need to speak with you privately." Something in his tone made her set down her music sheets. She led him to a small room behind the stage that served as her dressing area. It was neat, but sparse: a mirror, a chair, a small trunk, and hooks for costumes. "If this is about last night," she began, "it's about tonight, and tomorrow night, and all the nights after." Ethan removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "The town council's meeting right now, probably discussing how to run me out of town for taking your side. McKendry's got the judge in his pocket, the reverend's preaching hellfire about moral decay, and the railroad's threatening to take their money elsewhere." "I'm sorry, I never meant—" "I'm not finished." He met her eyes. "Doc Avery suggested something today, a way to calm things down, make everyone happy, or at least equally unhappy." She waited, those green eyes unreadable. "He suggested we get married." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Then Lydia laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine surprise. "Married you and me?" She sank into the chair. "That's crazy, I know." "I was going to say unexpected." She studied him. "Is this a real proposal? Marshall Cole?" "It's a business proposition. We marry. You become respectable. I show commitment to community values. The town settles down, the railroad stays. McKendry loses his main talking point." "How romantic." Her voice was dry as desert sand. "I'm not a romantic man, Miss Hart. Haven't been since—" He stopped, old memories threatening to surface. "Since the war," she guessed softly. He nodded curtly. "But I am practical, and I keep my word. If we do this, I'd treat you with respect, provide a home, protection. You could continue singing if you wanted, though probably at the church instead of here. And in return, you'd be my wife in public, keep house, attend church, play the part. And in private." Ethan felt heat rise in his neck. "That would be your choice. I'm not asking for, I wouldn't expect, a marriage in name only." She stood, moving to the small window that looked out on the alley. "Tell me, Marshall Ethan, why would you do this, risk binding yourself to a woman you barely know? A woman with a past that nobody talks about but everyone whispers over?" "Because I think you're getting a raw deal. Because this town needs to move past its narrow thinking if it's going to survive. And because—" He hesitated, then forced himself to continue. "Because I'm tired of being alone, even if it's just sharing a house with someone who understands what it's like to be an outsider." Lydia turned from the window. "I need to think about it." "Fair enough, but think fast. If the council votes tonight, we might both be looking for new towns by week's end." As Ethan moved toward the door, Lydia called after him. "If I say yes, and I'm not saying I will, but if I do, I have conditions." "Name them." "First, I keep singing. Maybe not here, but somewhere. Music it's who I am." "Agreed." "Second, no questions about my past. You don't ask, I don't ask. We start fresh from the wedding day forward." "I can live with that." "Third," she paused, seeming to gather courage, "if after 3 months we find we can't stand each other, or if the town trouble dies down, we can quietly separate. You can tell folks I went to visit family or some such. Seems reasonable. And fourth, her chin lifted. You treat me as an equal. I won't be ordered around like a servant or a child, partners or nothing. Ethan put his hat back on. Partners it is, assuming you say yes. I'll give you an answer by morning. The walk back to his office seemed longer than usual. The night was clear. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled silver. And somewhere a guitar played a mournful Mexican ballad. Ethan found Nate waiting for him, practically bouncing with nervous energy. Marshal. The council meeting, it was something else. They were all set to demand your badge when Mrs. Esperanza stood up. Doña Marisol Esperanza was one of the old Mexican families, a widow who'd buried 2 husbands and 3 sons, and still stood straighter than most men half her age. What did she say? She said any man who'd stand between a woman and violence was a man worth keeping. Then she reminded them that her family's been here since before any of them were born. And if they wanted to talk about moral decay, maybe they should start with the brothels that McKendry's men frequent twice a week. Ethan felt a smile tug at his mouth. I bet that went over well. Reverend Hale nearly swallowed his tongue. Then Doc Avery spoke up, and the schoolmarm, and even Henrik Muller from the general store. In the end, they voted to table the discussion pending further review of the situation. Meaning McKendry didn't have as many votes bought as he thought. Exactly. Nate hesitated. Marshal, is it true what they're saying about you and Miss Hart? What are they saying? That you're sweet on her. That's why you defended her so fierce. Ethan hung his gun belt on the peg by the door. People say a lot of things. Nate, best not to pay them too much mind. But as he lay in his narrow bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Ethan found himself thinking about green eyes and stubborn chins, and the way Lydia's voice could make hardened men remember softer times. Maybe Doc Avery wasn't so crazy after all. Maybe in a world gone mad with greed and change and old hatreds, the sanest thing was to grab onto something solid, even if that something came in the form of a business arrangement masquerading as a marriage. The next morning, he found a note slipped under his office door. Just one word in elegant handwriting. Yes. And so it was that Marshal Ethan Cole, who'd survived 43 battles and countless skirmishes, who'd faced down outlaws and renegades without flinching, found himself standing in front of Reverend Hale 3 days later, sweating through his best shirt and wondering if he'd finally met a challenge that might prove too much. Lydia stood beside him in a simple blue dress borrowed from the schoolmarm. Her face calm, but her hands trembling slightly where they held a small bouquet of desert wildflowers. The church was packed. Half the town come to witness what some called a scandal and others a miracle. Dearly beloved, Hale began, his tone suggesting he found them anything but. We are gathered here today. As the words washed over him, Ethan caught sight of McKendry in the back row, face like thunder. Garrison sat with him, arm still in a sling, murder in his eyes. But in the front row sat Doña Esperanza, Doc Avery, and young Nate, beaming like this was the finest thing he'd ever witnessed. Do you, Ethan, take this woman to... He looked at Lydia then, really looked at her, saw the courage it took to stand here, knowing what people thought, what they whispered, saw the pride that kept her spine straight and her chin high. Saw something else, too. Something that might have been hope. I do, he said, and meant it more than he'd expected. Do you, Lydia, take this man... Her voice was clear as church bells. I do. Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife. As they walked out of the church into blazing sunshine, rice raining down from well-wishers and skeptics alike, Ethan offered Lydia his arm. Well, Mrs. Cole, he said quietly, ready to calm this town down? She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her. Lead the way, Marshal. Let's see if we can't shake things up instead. And despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the sheer insanity of what they'd just done, Ethan found himself smiling back. Maybe this marriage was just a business arrangement, a political move to keep the peace. But standing there in the dusty street with his unexpected bride, he couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was at work, something that might just save them both. Or destroy them. Time would tell, but for now, they had a part to play. And Ethan Cole had never been one to back down from a challenge. The wedding dinner at the hotel was subdued but cordial, and if anyone noticed that the bride and groom barely touched their food and spoke mainly about the weather, they were polite enough not to mention it. As the sun set over Ash Fork, painting the sky in shades of fire, Mr. and Mrs. Ethan Cole walked to the small house on Cottonwood Street that would now be their home. At the threshold, Ethan paused. "I meant what I said. Your choices are your own. I'll take the back room." Lydia looked up at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "Thank you, and Ethan, we'll make this work, somehow." He nodded, and they entered their new life together. Two strangers bound by necessity, hope, and the wild promise of the frontier. Outside, the desert wind whispered secrets, and somewhere in the darkness, plans were being made that would test their fragile alliance sooner than either could imagine. 2 weeks into their marriage arrangement, Ethan woke to the smell of coffee, real coffee, not the tar he usually brewed. He found Lydia in the kitchen, morning light streaming through the gingham curtains she'd hung 3 days after moving in. "Morning," she said without turning from the stove. "Breakfast is almost ready." It had become their routine, polite, careful, like two dancers trying not to step on each other's feet. They shared meals and conversation, divided household duties, and maintained separate bedrooms. To the outside world, they played the part of newlyweds. Inside these walls, they were respectful strangers. "Any word from the railroad committee?" Lydia asked, setting a plate of eggs and biscuits before him. "They're sending an inspector next month. Want to see for themselves if we're stable enough for their investment." Ethan took a sip of coffee and couldn't suppress his appreciation. "This is good. My mother taught me, said a woman should know how to make proper coffee, tend a garden, and load a rifle." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. She was particular about her priorities. It was the most Lydia had shared about her past. Ethan filed it away with the other small pieces he'd gathered, the way she unconsciously rubbed her left wrist when nervous. How she knew which herbs could treat fever. The practiced way she could spot trouble before it started. A knock interrupted breakfast. Nate stood on the porch, hat in hand, trying not to stare at the domestic scene through the doorway. "Sorry to disturb. Marshall, Mrs. Cole, but we got trouble at the Murphy claim." Ethan was already reaching for his gun belt. "What kind of trouble?" "Someone ran off their water. Diverted the whole stream in the night. Murphy's hopping mad. Says it was McKendry's doing." "I'll be right there." As Nate hurried off, Ethan turned to Lydia. "I might be late tonight." "Be careful." The words seemed to surprise them both. After a pause, she added, "The town needs its marshal in one piece." The ride out to Murphy's claim took an hour through increasingly rough country. Sean Murphy was a small Irishman with a temper that made up for his size, and he was living up to his reputation when Ethan arrived. Destroyed. Marshal me whole operation. Murphy gestured wildly at the dry stream bed that had yesterday fed his sluice boxes. "That bastard McKendry did this." Ethan dismounted and studied the scene. The stream had indeed been diverted, but the work was rough, hasty. "Did you see anyone, hear anything?" "I was in town getting supplies. Came back to this?" Murphy spat. "It's that water rights bill. Marshal, McKendry wants to control all the water before the railroad comes." Ethan knew about the proposed water rights legislation. If passed, it would grandfather in existing claims but make new ones nearly impossible. McKendry, with his vast holdings, would control most of the valley's water. "I'll look into it," Ethan promised. "Meanwhile, you and your men work on getting that stream back where it belongs." As he rode back toward town, Ethan took a detour past the McKendry Ranch. The big house sat like a fortress on its hill, surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. He was studying the layout when riders approached Garrison and 3 others, all armed. "Lost, Marshal?" Garrison's injured arm was out of its sling but still held stiffly. "Just admiring the view. Peaceful out here. Man could get up to all sorts of business without anyone knowing." That sounds almost like an accusation. Garrison moved his horse closer. "You got proof of something, or just fishing?" "When I have proof, you'll be the second to know." Ethan turned his horse. "After the judge." He felt their eyes on his back all the way to the main road. In town, he found unexpected activity at his house. Several women were gathered on the porch, including Doña Esperanza and the schoolmarm, Miss Catherine Palmer. Lydia stood in their midst, looking bemused. "Ladies," Ethan touched his hat brim. "Marshal Cole." Doña Esperanza fixed him with dark eyes that had seen too much. "We are discussing the establishment of a school fund. Your wife has volunteered to teach music to the children." "Has she now?" He glanced at Lydia, who gave a small shrug. "The church is willing to provide space," Miss Palmer added, "though Reverend Hale has concerns." "I'm sure he does," Ethan said dryly. "Well, don't let me interrupt. Important work, education." As he headed inside, he heard Doña Esperanza say, "Your husband is a good man. Mija, sometimes they need time to realize what they have." That evening, over dinner, Lydia explained the school fund idea. Music teaches discipline, mathematics, working together. These children need something beyond their parents' feuds. "It's a good idea," Ethan agreed, "but it'll put you in McKendry's sights. He doesn't like changes he doesn't control." "I've been in men's sights before." Her chin lifted in that way he'd come to recognize. "I survived. Before, you were on your own. Now," he stopped, unsure how to finish. "Now I'm the marshal's wife." She stood to clear the dishes. "Does that mean I should sit quietly and embroider samplers?" "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" She turned to face him. "Dishes forgotten. Are we partners or not? Ethan." The question hung between them like a challenge. He thought of all the careful distances they'd maintained, the polite choreography of their shared space. "We're partners," he said finally. "Teach your music classes, just be careful." Something in her expression softened. "I'm always careful." That night, the first rains of the season began, a gentle patter that promised more to come. Ethan lay awake listening to it drum on the roof, thinking about water rights and diverted streams and the way Lydia hummed while she cooked. The next morning brought mud and clearer skies. It also brought Doc Avery to the marshal's office, looking troubled. "Ethan, I've been treating a lot of injuries lately, mining accidents. They claim, but the wounds look more like they come from fighting." "McKendry's men practicing. That's my guess. But practicing for what?" Doc accepted a cup of coffee, grimaced at its quality. "Also, I've been ordering extra medical supplies. Someone else has been buying up laudanum and bandages in bulk." Ethan set down his cup. "How much? Enough to treat a small army, or to keep men going who ought to be resting?" Doc met his eyes. "I fought in the war too. Ethan, I know what those supplies mean." Before Ethan could respond, commotion erupted in the street. They rushed out to find a crowd gathering around a wagon. In the bed lay Pete Hollis, one of the smaller ranchers from the valley's far end. He was badly beaten, face swollen beyond recognition. "McKendry's men," his wife sobbed. "They came to buy our water rights. Pete said no." Ethan helped carry Hollis into Doc's office. As the physician worked, Mrs. Hollis told the story through tears. 6 of them, masked, said this was just a warning. Next time would be worse. "Can Pete identify them?" "They made sure he couldn't," Doc said grimly, examining the man's injuries. "Professional job." painful but not deadly, meant to send a message. Ethan found Nate and sent him to fetch the circuit judge. It was time to push back before McKendry pushed too hard to stop. That afternoon, Lydia appeared at his office with a basket. "You missed lunch," she said simply, unpacking sandwiches and fresh coffee. As they ate, he told her about Hollis. Her face paled, but her voice stayed steady. How many other small ranchers might be targeted? 6, maybe more. McKendry needs to control the water before the railroad arrives and land prices soar. Then we need to warn them, organize them. Ethan raised an eyebrow. The women talk to me now. Their husbands might listen if their wives push them to band together. She paused, then added quietly, I know what it's like to face bullies alone. It doesn't end well. Again, that hint of her past. Ethan wanted to ask, but remembered their agreement. Instead, he said, it could be dangerous. If McKendry realizes you're organizing against him, then we'd better be smart about it. She repacked the basket with efficient movements. The quilting circle meets tomorrow. Amazing how much planning can happen over needlework. That evening, Ethan made rounds through town, a habit he developed to gauge the mood. Outside the Silver Dollar, he encountered someone unexpected. Judge Hancock, looking furtive. "Judge," Ethan greeted him. "Didn't expect you back so soon." Hancock startled. "Ah, Marshal. Yes, well, business in the area." He glanced nervously at the saloon. "Not official business, you understand." "Of course." Ethan filed away the man's nervousness. "Enjoy your evening." At home, he found Lydia in the parlor, writing letters by lamplight. She'd changed the room, subtly added plants, rearranged furniture, made it warmer somehow. "Writing to family?" he asked, settling into his chair with the week-old newspaper. "To other towns' women's groups. If we're to have a proper school fund, we need support." She sealed a letter with precise movements. "Did you know there's a movement for women's suffrage gaining ground in Wyoming?" "Dangerous ideas, Mrs. Cole," he said with dry humor. "The most necessary ones usually are." She set aside her pen. "Ethan, what made you leave the war and come west?" The question caught him off guard. "Thought we agreed not to ask about the past." "You're right. I apologize." She gathered her letters. "Good night." "Wait." The word came out before he could stop it. When she paused, he continued. "I came west because I couldn't stand who I'd become. Needed space to figure out if there was anything worth salvaging. And was there?" He thought about it. "Still figuring that out?" She smiled, a real smile, not the polite society version. "Good night, Ethan." The next day brought more rain and more trouble. The morning stage brought a letter that made Ethan's blood run cold. It was from the Pinkerton Agency, responding to an inquiry he'd made weeks ago about Lydia's background. He stared at the unopened envelope. They'd agreed no questions about the past, but that was before she'd become central to his plans against McKendry, before he'd started to... He locked the letter in his desk drawer, unopened. Whatever secrets Lydia carried, she'd earned the right to keep them through 2 weeks of quiet dignity and surprising courage. That afternoon, word came that another small rancher had been visited. This time, they'd signed over their water rights. The pattern was clear. McKendry was moving fast, trying to lock up the valley before opposition could organize. Ethan was planning his next move when Lydia burst into his office, eyes bright with excitement. "The women agree. We're organizing a town meeting officially about the school fund, but really to discuss mutual protection for the smaller ranchers." "When?" "Sunday, after church. Neutral ground. Hard for McKendry to object without seeming against education." "Clever." He felt a surge of admiration. "You're a natural strategist." "I had good teachers." The brightness dimmed slightly. "Though I paid dearly for the lessons." Before he could respond, she was gone. leaving behind the faint scent of lavender and the growing certainty that this marriage of convenience was becoming something neither of them had expected. That night, the rains turned into a genuine storm. Thunder rolled across the valley like artillery, and lightning illuminated the landscape in stark, momentary revelations. Ethan made his rounds despite the weather, checking on merchants, battening down goods, and ensuring the jail was secure. He was heading home, water streaming from his hat. When he heard it, voices raised in anger from the alley behind the hotel. Moving closer, he recognized Judge Hancock's distinctive whine. "You promised protection. I can't keep ruling in your favor if you'll keep doing exactly what you're told." That was Garrison's growl. "Unless you want certain facts about your gambling debts to reach Austin." Ethan eased around the corner in time to see Garrison hand Hancock a bag that clinked with the distinctive sound of gold coins. "This squares us for now," Garrison continued. "But remember, Judge, you belong to Mr. McKendry. Try to grow a conscience, and you'll find out what happened to the last judge who disappointed him." After they separated, Ethan stood in the rain, processing what he'd witnessed. Judicial corruption wasn't surprising, but having proof was another matter. The question was how to use it without getting Hancock killed and losing any chance of legal recourse. At home, he found the house dark except for a light in the kitchen. Lydia sat at the table, a cup of tea cooling in front of her. "Couldn't sleep," she explained. "The storm." He hung up his wet coat and poured himself coffee from the ever-present pot. "Bad memories." She nodded slowly. "There was a storm the night I left St. Louis. Thunder covered a lot of sounds I'd rather forget." They sat in companionable silence, listening to the rain. Finally, Lydia spoke again. "I know what people think, that I was a parlor girl or worse. The truth is both better and worse than their gossip." Ethan waited, sensing this was important. "I was engaged once, to a respectable man, from a good family, the kind of match every mother wants for her daughter." Her fingers traced patterns on the table. "He was also the kind of man who believed ownership came with a ring. When I tried to break the engagement, thunder crashed overhead, and she flinched." Ethan reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. "You don't have to tell me," he said quietly. "I know. That's why I want to." She looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. "He tried to force matters. I defended myself with a fireplace poker. His family had influence. So I ran, changed my name, kept moving west until I found places where people didn't ask too many questions." "Lydia!" "Sarah. My real name is Sarah Jennings." She laughed shakily. "Though I have been Lydia Hart so long, I hardly remember being anyone else." Ethan turned his hand palm up on the table, an invitation, not a demand. After a moment, she placed her hand in his. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. "Your secrets are safe," he said. "All of them. Even from McKendry if he starts digging." "Especially from McKendry." He squeezed her hand gently. "Partners. Remember." She smiled through her tears. "Partners." They sat that way for a long time, hands linked across the table while the storm raged outside. It wasn't the marriage either had imagined, built on necessity and mutual protection. But in that moment, with the rain drumming on the roof and their carefully maintained walls beginning to crumble, it felt like something that might grow into more. If they could survive what was coming, because Ethan could feel it building like the storm McKendry's final push, the railroad's arrival, the violence that always came when powerful men felt their grip slipping. But tonight, he had this Lydia's trust, freely given, Sarah's truth, bravely shared, and the growing certainty that whatever name she wore, whatever past she carried, she was worth fighting for. The storm began to ease as dawn approached, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming. As they finally rose to seek their separate beds, Lydia paused at her door. "Thank you," she said simply. "For listening, for not judging." "Thank you." he replied, "for trusting me." After she closed her door, Ethan stood in the hallway for a long moment, thinking about courage and second chances and the unexpected ways people could save each other. Then he went to his own room, but not to sleep. Instead, he sat at his small desk and began planning how to protect not just the town, but the remarkable woman who'd agreed to share his name, if not yet his life. Outside, the first birds began to sing, greeting a day that promised new challenges and new possibilities in equal measure. And in a house on Cottonwood Street, two wounded souls began the slow, careful work of building something stronger than either could manage alone. The dust storm struck without warning on a Tuesday afternoon. Ethan had seen them before, walls of dirt and debris that could turn day to night in minutes. But this one was different. This one had timing that felt deliberate. He was at the jail when the first wisps of dust began dancing down Main Street. Nate burst through the door moments later, bandana already pulled up over his nose. "Marshal, big one coming from the west. Can see it from the bell tower like a mountain moving our way." Ethan grabbed his own bandana. "Ring the bell. 3 long, 3 short. Get everyone inside." As Nate ran for the church, Ethan headed into the wind. The train was due in an hour, the special freight carrying payroll for the mines and equipment for the railroad survey team, if it hit the storm. He found Lydia at the school, helping Miss Palmer herd children inside. Her hair whipped around her face as she counted heads. "That's all of them," she shouted over the rising wind. "Except wait, where's Emma?" Emma Rodriguez, the blacksmith's daughter, 7 years old and curious as a cat. Ethan's heart sank. "She was asking about the train," Miss Palmer said. "Wanted to see the engine." Ethan was already running. The depot was a quarter-mile east, directly in the storm's path. Behind him, he heard Lydia shout his name, but the wind swallowed the sound. The world turned brown, then black. Dirt filled his mouth, nose, eyes. He navigated by memory and instinct. One hand on the buildings for guidance. The familiar shapes of town became alien in the swirling darkness. At the depot, he found chaos. The train had arrived early and sat on the tracks like a beached whale. Men stumbled around blindly, trying to secure cargo. Through the howling wind, he heard a child's terrified cry. Emma huddled beneath the water tower, too frightened to move. Ethan scooped her up, wrapping his coat around her small form. Now came the hard part, finding their way back. He chose the doctor's office as the closest shelter, fighting for every step. The wind tried to tear Emma from his arms, but he held tight, whispering reassurances he wasn't sure she could hear, when his shoulder hit a wall. He felt along until he found a door, praying he'd guessed right. They tumbled inside to find Doc Avery's surgery full of refugees from the storm. Lydia was there because, of course, she was helping tend to a man with a gashed forehead. "Emma!" She dropped her bandages and ran to them. The child threw herself into Lydia's arms, sobbing. "Mama's gonna be so worried," Emma whimpered. "Shh, sweetheart. We'll get word to her as soon as the storm passes." Lydia smoothed the girl's hair, her eyes meeting Ethan's over the small head. Something passed between them, relief, gratitude, and something deeper. The storm raged for 2 hours. When it finally passed, Ash Fork looked like it had been buried and exhumed. Drifts of dirt reached halfway up doorways. The main street was impassable in places. But that wasn't the worst news. "Marshal!" One of the train guards stumbled into the doctor's office, face pale beneath the dirt. "The payroll car, it's been robbed." Ethan's blood ran cold. In the chaos of the storm, someone had broken into the reinforced car and taken everything mine payroll, railroad funds, all of it. At the scene, the evidence was confusing. The locks had been opened, not broken, suggesting inside knowledge. The guards swore they'd been at their posts until the storm hit, then sought shelter like everyone else. "Professional job," Nate observed, studying the empty strongboxes. Knew exactly what they were after. Ethan knelt by the tracks, Examining the ground, the storm had erased most traces, but there, a partial boot print, preserved in a spot where spilled water had turned dust to mud. A distinctive print, expensive boots with custom heel plates. He'd seen those boots before, in McKendry's house. As the town dug out from the storm, worse news arrived. 2 of the small ranchers who'd refused to sell their water rights had been hit during the chaos. Burned out, their families barely escaping with their lives. "Couldn't see who did it," Sam Cooper said from his bed in Doc's office, burns covering his arms. "Storm hit everything, but they knew right where to hit the barn, the well house, like they'd scouted it." Ethan felt the trap closing. McKendry had used the storm as cover for multiple strikes. The stolen payroll would cripple the smaller mines, forcing them to sell. The burned-out ranchers would have no choice but to accept whatever offer came their way. And with Judge Hancock in his pocket, "We need to wire for federal marshals," Nate suggested. With what evidence? Ethan kicked at a drift of dirt. Boot prints, the storm mostly erased suspicions and coincidences. That evening, he found the house on Cottonwood Street transformed into a relief center. Lydia had organized the women to cook for displaced families, tend injuries, and coordinate cleanup efforts. Emma Rodriguez sat at the kitchen table, teaching Lydia a Spanish lullaby while her mother helped serve food. "You've been busy," Ethan observed, accepting a plate from Doña Esperanza. "Idle hands," Lydia replied, but he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "Besides, this is what communities do pull together in crisis. Even manufactured ones." She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "You think McKendry orchestrated this?" "I think he's too smart to waste an opportunity." He told her about the robberies, the fires, the convenient timing. Lydia was quiet for a moment, ladling soup with mechanical precision. Then, "The quilting circle meets tomorrow. Some of those women are married to McKendry's men. They might have heard something. Be careful. If McKendry suspects you're gathering information, he already suspects me of corrupting the town's morals. What's a little espionage added to the list?" She tried for levity, but worry shadowed her eyes. That night, unable to sleep, Ethan sat on the front porch cleaning his guns. The simple, familiar action helped him think. McKendry was accelerating his timeline while the railroad inspection was still weeks away. Unless it wasn't, unless someone had word it had been moved up, that would explain the desperate moves, the willingness to use the storm as cover despite the risks. Can't sleep either. He looked up to find Lydia in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl. She joined him on the porch, pulling her chair close to his. "I keep thinking about Emma," she said softly. "How scared she was, how small she felt in that storm." "You were good with her, natural." "I always wanted children." The admission seemed to surprise her. "Before everything, I imagined a different life." "It's not too late for different," Ethan said carefully. She smiled sadly. "Isn't it? We're not exactly a conventional family, Marshall Cole." "Maybe conventional is overrated." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear between scudding clouds. Finally, Lydia spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you need evidence against McKendry that even Hancock couldn't ignore. And what if we had documents proof of the payroll robbery, the water rights intimidation?" Ethan turned to study her. "That would require getting into McKendry's office, into his safe." "Yes, it would." She met his gaze steadily. "I might know someone who could help. From my before, someone who specializes in opening things that are meant to stay closed." "Lydia." "Sarah?" she corrected softly. "If we're discussing my past, use my real name. And yes, I know it's dangerous, but we're running out of time and options." Ethan set aside his gun, giving her his full attention. "Tell me." "His name is Marcus Chen. His father was one of the railroad workers. His mother ran a laundry. Marcus had clever hands and a good mind too good for the opportunities available to a Chinese boy in St. Louis. He fell in with alternative employers. And you know him how? He helped me leave the city, opened certain doors, closed others. I trust him. Ethan, more importantly, he owes me. I kept his sister from a bad situation once. Ethan weighed the risks. Bringing in an outsider, especially one with a criminal past, could backfire spectacularly. But Lydia was right, they were running out of moves. Can you contact him? I can try. There are ways to send messages through the Chinese communities along the railroad routes. She pulled her shawl tighter. But if we do this, we do it together. Full partners. Wouldn't have it any other way. The next morning brought more bad news. The mine owners were meeting, discussing whether to suspend operations without the payroll. The burned-out ranchers had accepted McKendry's offers for their land pennies on the dollar. But better than nothing. Ethan was at his desk, writing yet another carefully worded report, when Reverend Hale arrived with a delegation of town councilmen. Marshal. Hale began without preamble. This lawlessness cannot continue. If you're unable to maintain order. Unable, Ethan set down his pen deliberately. I've got theft, arson, and assault, all conveniently timed with a natural disaster that erased evidence. You want to tell me how to police that, Reverend? Perhaps if you spent less time defending fallen women and more time. Choose your next words very carefully. Ethan stood slowly. My wife runs a relief center that's fed half this town in the last day. What exactly have you contributed besides criticism? Councilman Morgan, the banker, intervened. Gentlemen, please, we're all frustrated, but the fact remains, Marshal, that without the mine payroll, this town's economy will collapse. The railroad will certainly reconsider. Which is exactly what someone wants. Ethan interrupted. Ask yourself, who benefits if the mines close and the railroad pulls out? The men exchanged glances. They weren't stupid, just scared and overwhelmed. You're suggesting Baron McKendry is behind this? Morgan asked carefully. I'm suggesting you follow the money. Who's been buying up water rights? Who has the resources to plan something this coordinated? Ethan let that sink in. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have investigations to conduct. After they left, Nate appeared with a telegram. From the railroad. Marshal, the inspection team, they're coming early. Be here in 3 days. 3 days. Ethan crumpled the telegram. No wonder McKendry was moving fast. That afternoon, while making rounds, he noticed unusual activity at the Silver Dollar. McKendry's men were gathering, too many for normal drinking. Through the window, he saw Garrison holding court, gesturing animatedly. Ethan found the back entrance and slipped inside, positioning himself where he could hear without being seen. Tomorrow night, Garrison was saying, during the town meeting, while everyone's discussing their precious school fund, we finished the job. The last 3 holdouts, all at once. What about the marshal? Someone asked. Cole will be at the meeting with his pretty wife. By the time he hears about it, it'll be done. Then Mr. McKendry owns every drop of water in the valley, legal and proper. Ethan eased back out, mind racing. Tomorrow night, the town meeting Lydia had organized, McKendry was using it against them. He had to warn the remaining ranchers, post guards. But when he returned to his office, Lydia was waiting with a slight Chinese woman he didn't recognize. This is Mei Chen, Lydia said quietly. Marcus's sister. She has a message. Mei Chen looked nervous but determined. My brother says to tell the songbird he remembers his debt. He will arrive on tomorrow's eastbound freight. He also says... She paused, glancing at Ethan uncertainly. It's all right, Lydia assured her. Ethan knows? He says the wolf still hunts in St. Louis, but his teeth grow dull. The songbird need not fear old howls. Lydia's face went pale, then resolved. Thank him for the news. After Mei Chen left, Ethan asked, "The wolf. My former fiancé, still looking for me, apparently, but without success." She straightened. "It doesn't matter. What matters is Marcus will be here tomorrow. We can move tomorrow night during the meeting." "About that," Ethan explained what he'd overheard. Lydia's expression grew grimmer with each word. "Then we need a new plan," she said finally. "One that protects the ranchers and gets us into McKendry's safe." They spent the evening strategizing, maps spread across the kitchen table. Slowly, a plan emerged dangerous, requiring split-second timing and more luck than Ethan liked. But it might work. As midnight approached, Lydia made coffee while Ethan refined details. She set his cup down, then surprised him by squeezing his shoulder. "We make a good team, Marshal Cole." He covered her hand with his. "Yes, we do." For a moment, they stayed frozen that way. Then Lydia cleared her throat and stepped back. "I should sleep. Tomorrow will be long." "Lydia, Sarah, wait." She paused at the doorway. "After this is over, however it ends, I want you to know I'm glad you said yes. To the marriage, to all of it." She smiled, soft and genuine. "So am I, Ethan, so am I." The next day dawned clear and hot, the storm's traces already being erased by wind and sun. Ethan made his preparations, carefully positioning Nate and the few deputies he trusted, sending carefully worded warnings to the threatened ranchers. Marcus Chen arrived on the afternoon train, a slight man with intelligent eyes and an easy smile. He and Lydia embraced like old friends while Ethan tried not to feel the unexpected stab of jealousy. "Marshal," Marcus said, offering his hand. "Lydia, sorry. Sarah has told me much about you. I'm honored to help." That evening, as the town gathered at the church for the meeting, the plan went into motion. Lydia took the stage to discuss the school fund, holding the crowd's attention with her natural charisma. Ethan watched from the back, noting which of McKendry's men were present and which were conspicuously absent. McKendry himself sat in the third row, the picture of civic engagement. He even pledged a donation to the school fund, drawing applause. "Hypocrite," someone muttered beside Ethan. He turned to find Doña Esperanza, eyes flashing with anger. "Patience," Ethan murmured. "Justice comes to those who wait for the right moment." As Lydia spoke about the importance of education and community, Ethan slipped out, time to spring their trap. At the first threatened ranch, he found Garrison and 3 men preparing to torch the barn. They were so focused on their task, they didn't notice Ethan and his deputies until guns were at their backs. "Evening, boys," Ethan said conversationally. "Funny time for a barn raising." The arrests were swift and quiet. By the time the church meeting concluded, Ethan had 12 of McKendry's men in custody and enough evidence to bring serious charges. But the night's work wasn't done. While Ethan handled the arrests, Marcus Chen had slipped into McKendry's house, with most of the Baron's security at the church or out causing mayhem. The safe proved little challenge for Marcus's skilled hands. They met at the jail near midnight, Ethan, Lydia, and Marcus, to review the haul. Documents proving bribery, extortion, plans to manipulate water rights, even correspondence about the payroll robbery. "This is it," Lydia breathed. "This is enough to stop him." "If we can get it to honest law," Ethan cautioned. "Hancock won't. Then we bypass Hancock." Marcus produced another document. "Found this too. Seems your judge has been skimming from McKendry. The Baron keeps records of everything, including his own judge's betrayals." Ethan smiled grimly. "Now that's what I call justice." As dawn approached, they sat in exhausted triumph. The evidence was secured, the immediate threat neutralized. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, McKendry's rage, legal battles, the railroad inspection, but tonight they'd won. "Thank you," Ethan said to Marcus. "Name your price." "No price." Marcus glanced at Lydia with genuine affection. Sarah saved my sister from a life she didn't choose. This barely begins to balance that debt. After Marcus left to catch the morning train, Ethan and Lydia walked home through empty streets. At their door, she stumbled with exhaustion, and he caught her arm. "Easy there, partner." She leaned into him. "Just for a moment." "We did it." "We did." He helped her inside, acutely aware of her warmth against his side. "You were magnificent tonight. Had that whole crowd eating from your hand. While you were out being a hero." "Again?" She looked up at him, eyes bright despite her exhaustion. "Emma Rodriguez has been telling everyone how you saved her from the storm. You're becoming a legend. Marshall Cole." "I'm no hero, just a man doing his job." "Maybe that's what heroes are." She reached up, touched his cheek briefly. "Good night, Ethan." As she disappeared into her room, Ethan stood in the hallway, hand on his face where she'd touched him. Tomorrow would bring the fight of their lives as McKendry realized his empire was crumbling. But tonight, in this moment, Ethan Cole allowed himself to hope for justice, for the town, and maybe, just maybe, for the chance at a real marriage with the remarkable woman who'd started as a convenient solution and become so much more. Outside, the first birds began to sing, heralding a new day in Ash Fork, a day that would test every alliance they'd built, every plan they'd made. But for now, Ethan smiled and headed to his own bed, knowing that whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. The day after the arrests had been long and brutal. McKendry's lawyers descended like locusts, challenging every charge, while the Baron himself maintained an icy calm that worried Ethan more than rage would have. By evening, exhaustion weighed on him like a physical thing as he climbed the porch steps of the house on Cottonwood Street. Inside, he found Lydia at the kitchen table, head in her hands. The usual dinner preparations sat untouched. "Lydia." He hung his gun belt carefully. "What's wrong?" She looked up, and he saw she'd been crying. Wordlessly, she pushed a telegram across the table. Ethan read it, his jaw tightening. Samuel Morrison of St. Louis inquiring about one Sarah Jennings, believed to be in Arizona territory. Substantial reward for information. "He found me." Her voice was hollow. "After all this time, all this distance." "Hey." Ethan moved around the table, crouching beside her chair. "Look at me." When she did, he continued. "You're not Sarah Jennings anymore. You're Lydia Cole, and you're under my protection." Legal protection won't stop him. You don't know Samuel what he's capable of when he feels his property has been taken. "You're not property." The fierceness in his own voice surprised him. "You're a free woman in a territory that recognizes that freedom." She laughed bitterly. "Free I've been running for 3 years. Ethan, changing names. Never staying long enough to build anything real. Until here. Until..." She gestured helplessly at the kitchen, the house, the life they've been building. "Then we don't run. We stand and fight." "You don't understand. He has money, influence. And I have a badge and a very particular set of skills learned in places much worse than St. Louis." He took her hands, noting how cold they were. "Trust me, Lydia, please." She searched his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "What do we do?" "First, we eat something. Can't plan on an empty stomach." He stood, moving to the stove. "Then we talk strategy. And tonight," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "Tonight, maybe we reconsider the sleeping arrangements." She stiffened. "Ethan, I won't." "Not that..." He turned to face her, feeling heat rise in his neck. "I meant maybe I should move my bedroll to the hallway outside your room. Or you could take my room, it has a better lock. I need to know you're safe." Something in her expression softened. "Oh, yes, that would be good." They prepared a simple meal together, moving around each other with the practiced ease they'd developed over the past weeks. As they ate, Ethan told her about the day's legal battles, trying to distract her from her fears. Judge Hancock nearly swallowed his tongue when the federal marshal presented the evidence of his skimming, he said, suddenly very eager to recuse himself from anything involving McKendry. Will the charges stick? Some will. The barn burning for certain, we caught them red-handed. The rest depends on finding an honest judge. He paused. The railroad investigators arrive tomorrow. If we can show them the town's stable despite McKendry's interference, they'll continue with the investment. Lydia pushed food around her plate. It all seems so small now. Railroad investments, water rights, town politics. When Samuel gets here. If he gets here, and if he does, he'll find things aren't like they were in St. Louis. Ethan reached across the table, waiting until she met his eyes. You're not alone anymore. After dinner, they worked together to rearrange the sleeping situation. Ethan moved his few possessions to the smaller back room while Lydia took the larger front bedroom with its sturdier door and window locks. As they worked, the domesticity of it sharing space, making decisions together, struck him with unexpected force. There, he said, testing the new bolt he'd installed on her door. That should hold against anything short of a battering ram. Thank you. She stood in the doorway, silhouetted by lamplight. For everything. I know this isn't what you signed up for when we made our arrangement. Lydia. He struggled for words. What I signed up for was a partnership. This is what partners do. She smiled sadly. Is that what we are, just partners? The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities. Before he could answer, she continued quickly. I'm sorry. I'm tired and scared and saying things I shouldn't. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Sarah. Her breath caught at his use of her real name. Then she closed the door, and he heard the new bolt slide home. Ethan lay awake in the unfamiliar room, listening to the house settle around him. Every creak made him tense, hand moving to the Colt on the nightstand. But the greater threat wasn't outside. It was the growing realization that somewhere between convenience and necessity, he'd fallen for his wife. The night deepened, bringing a cool breeze through the open window. Pine resin and sage mingled with the lingering scent of dinner, creating a perfume unique to this place, this moment. He dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. It was near midnight when he heard its soft footsteps in the hall. He was up instantly, gun in hand, easing his door open. Lydia stood at the kitchen window in her nightgown and shawl, looking out at the moonlit street. She turned at his approach, not seeming surprised. Couldn't sleep either, she asked softly. He set the gun on the counter. Too much on my mind. Tell me about the war, she said unexpectedly. You never talk about it, but I see it in you sometimes. The way you check exits, how you sleep light, the nightmares you think I don't hear. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then, surprising himself, he began to talk. He told her about Chickamauga, about the fog and the friendly fire and the way men screamed when grape shot found them, about the months in Andersonville after his capture, where honor and humanity died slower deaths than the prisoners, about the things he'd done to survive, to escape, to make it home only to find home no longer existed. I came west to outrun those ghosts, he admitted. Thought distance and duty would be enough, but they followed anyway. Is that why you never married the ghosts? Partly. Also because I never found anyone who made the risk seem worth it. He looked at her directly. Until recently, the air between them seemed to thicken. Lydia moved closer, drawn by something neither could name. Ethan, I know we have an agreement, he said quickly. I'm not asking to change that, but you should know when this is over. When Morrison is dealt with and McKendry's in prison and the town is safe, I'll be asking you to stay, not because of convenience or appearances, because She kissed him. It was gentle, almost hesitant, but it stopped his words and thoughts alike. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with tears. Don't make promises, she whispered. Not tonight, not when tomorrow could change everything. He caught her hand as she turned to go. Then let me make just one. Whatever comes, you won't face it alone. That's not convenience talking. Sarah, that's me. She squeezed his hand, then disappeared back to her room. This time. Ethan didn't hear the bolt slide. A small thing, but it felt like progress. Morning came too soon, bringing with it a whirlwind of activity. The railroad investigators' train pulled in just after breakfast, disgorging a trio of serious men in city suits who looked distinctly out of place in Ash Fork's dusty streets. Ethan met them with Mayor Patterson and several council members, including a subdued Reverend Hale. They toured the town, inspected the proposed depot site, reviewed plans for growth and development. All the while, Ethan kept one eye on the street, watching for any sign of McKendry's next move. He found Lydia at the school, teaching the music class she'd fought to establish. Her students, a mix of ages and backgrounds, were attempting amazing grace, with more enthusiasm than skill, but their faces shone with concentration and joy. "Children," Lydia said, noticing him. "Let's take a short break. Practice your scales." She joined him outside, and he was struck again by how natural she looked here, how much a part of the community she'd become in such a short time. "The investigators?" she asked. "Touring the bank now. They seem impressed by the recovery efforts after the storm." He paused. "Any word from town? Anyone asking about St. Louis matters?" "Not yet, but I feel it coming, like another storm." She wrapped her arms around herself despite the warmth. "I keep thinking I should leave, disappear before Samuel gets here, before I bring more trouble to you in the town." "Don't." The word came out harsher than intended. "Running now would undo everything we've built. Besides," he attempted lightness, "who would teach these kids to carry a tune?" She smiled weakly. "They are rather hopeless, aren't they?" "Beautifully hopeless." He touched her arm briefly. "I have to get back, but tonight, after the investigators' dinner, we need to talk. Really talk. About us, about what happens next." "After everything's settled," she agreed. "One crisis at a time. Marshall." The formal dinner at the hotel that evening was a carefully orchestrated affair. The town's leading citizens put on their best faces and clothes, presenting Ash Fork as a community ready for progress and prosperity. Even McKendry attended, playing the role of civic-minded cattle baron to perfection. Ethan watched it all with barely concealed tension. Something was coming, he could feel it in the two bright smiles, the nervous energy that crackled through the room. Beside him, Lydia maintained perfect composure, charming the investigators with stories of her music students and the Women's Civic Improvement Society. It was during dessert that the storm broke. The hotel doors burst open, and a man strode in who could only be Samuel Morrison. Tall, well-dressed, with the kind of sharp handsomeness that masked something cruel. He surveyed the room until his eyes found Lydia. "Sarah," he said, voice carrying clearly, "I've come to take you home." The room froze. Lydia's hand found Ethan's under the table. Gripping tight, he stood slowly, badge catching the light. "I'm Marshall Cole, and you are—" "Samuel Morrison of St. Louis. I've come for my fiancée." Morrison's smile was all teeth. "Surely even in this backwater, theft of a promised bride is still a crime." "Can't steal what was never property," Ethan replied evenly. "And the lady's name is Mrs. Cole now. My wife." Morrison's face darkened. "A sham marriage to a frontier lawman, Sarah. Truly, you disappoint me." He took a step forward. "Come now. I've forgiven your little rebellion. Time to return to civilization." "No." Lydia stood, chin high despite her trembling. "I'm never going back with you, Samuel. What we had, what you tried to force, that's over." "Is it?" Morrison pulled out a sheaf of papers. "I have here a warrant for your arrest. Assault, theft of valuable jewelry, breach of promise, all properly sworn before a St. Louis judge." "Those are lies," Lydia said flatly. "I took nothing that wasn't mine, and the only assault was—" She stopped, face flushing. "Was what? My dear, your word against mine. Who do you think they'll believe, a respected businessman or a saloon singer who's been living under a false name?" Ethan stepped between them. "Those warrants have no power here. Arizona territory has its own laws." "Perhaps, but the railroad investigators might be interested to know they're considering investment in a town that harbors fugitives." Morrison's smile widened as the investigators shifted uncomfortably. "Bad for business. Scandal. Isn't that right, gentlemen?" This was the trap, Ethan realized. Not violence, but respectability, using the town's own desires against them. Mr. Morrison," one of the investigators said carefully. "These are serious allegations. Perhaps we should postpone—" "Now, hold on," Doc Avery interrupted, standing with difficulty. "I've known Mrs. Cole for months now. She's been nothing but an asset to this community. Teaching our children," Miss Palmer added, also rising. "Organizing relief efforts, bringing culture and refinement." "Enough." Morrison's veneer cracked, showing the ugliness beneath. "I don't care what she's pretended to be here. She belongs to me, and I will have what's mine." That's when Doña Esperanza spoke from her corner table. "Young man, I have lived through Spanish rule, Mexican independence, and American expansion. I have seen many men claim to own what cannot be owned. They all learned, eventually, that the desert teaches hard lessons about possession." "Is that a threat, Senora?" "It is a truth." She stood, and suddenly the room saw her as Ethan did not just an elderly widow, but a survivor of countless battles. A force of nature wrapped in black lace. This woman has chosen her place. That place is here. You are not welcome. Others began standing, the schoolmarm, the banker's wife, Henrik Muller. Even some of McKendry's men who'd been charmed by Lydia's singing. A wall of frontier solidarity against Eastern presumption. Morrison's face went ugly. "Fine, protect her if you will. But know this, I have resources. Lawyers, connections, influence that reaches even here. I will destroy this town's prospects if that's what it takes." He looked directly at Lydia. "Last chance, Sarah. Come quietly, or watch everything you've grown to care about burn." "Like you burned my father's business when he opposed our engagement." Lydia's voice was steady now. "Like you destroyed my brother's military career when he tried to protect me. I know your methods. Samuel, but these people aren't afraid of you." "Then they're fools." Morrison turned on his heel. "You have until tomorrow noon. Then I start making good on my promises." After he left, the dinner dissolved into chaos. The investigators huddled together, clearly reconsidering their plans. Town leaders argued about responses, and at the center of it all, Lydia stood pale but resolute. Ethan guided her out into the cool night air. They walked in silence until they reached their house, their sanctuary that suddenly seemed fragile as glass. "I should have told you," she said as they sat on the porch. "About the warrant, about what he might do. You told me what mattered. The rest is just paper and lies. Paper and lies that could destroy everything you've worked for." She turned to him, eyes fierce. "I won't let that happen. I'll go with him before—" "No." He caught her shoulders. "Listen to me. You're not going anywhere. Not with him, not alone, not ever if I have anything to say about it. Ethan, I love you." The words came out in a rush. "I know we agreed to no promises, but I can't stand here and pretend this is just about duty or protecting the town. I love you, Sarah Jennings or Lydia Hart or whatever name you choose, and I'll be damned if I let him take you." She stared at him, tears spilling over. "You impossible man, how can you say that now, when everything's falling apart?" "Because it's true. Because you need to hear it. Because tomorrow we're going to fight for our life together. And you should know what we're fighting for." She kissed him then, different from the night before, desperate and fierce and full of fear transformed into determination. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she whispered against his lips, "I love you too. God help me, I do." They held each other on that porch, under stars that had witnessed 1,000 other stands against impossible odds. Tomorrow would bring battle legal, political, perhaps physical. Morrison would make good on his threats. The railroad might flee, the town might turn against them. But tonight, Ethan Cole held his wife, his true wife, now in heart, if not yet in body, and prepared for war. He'd fought for causes before, for country and duty and abstract ideals of justice. This time, he'd fight for love. And that, he thought as Lydia pressed close against him, made all the difference. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she murmured, "I want you to know asking you to marry me was supposed to be the smart thing, the safe thing, but somewhere along the way, it became the true thing, the real thing." He pressed his lips to her hair. "Then let's make it more real." She pulled back to look at him, understanding dawning. "Ethan Cole, are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm asking you to come to bed with me, to be my wife in truth, to let me love you the way I've wanted to since you stood up to Garrison in that saloon." He cupped her face gently. "But only if you want it to. Only if—" "Yes." The word was barely a breath. "Yes, Ethan, please." He stood, offering his hand. She took it, and together they walked into the house. At her bedroom door, their bedroom door, now she paused. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of you, never of you, but of hoping, of believing this could be real." "Then let me show you," he said softly, "how real we can make it." The scene fades to black as they enter the room together, the door closing on their first night as true husband and wife, finding solace and strength in each other before the storm that morning would surely bring. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the weight of Morrison's ultimatum. Ethan woke to find Lydia already dressed, standing at the window watching the street. The morning light caught in her hair, and for a moment, he allowed himself to simply look at her, this woman who'd become everything. "Regrets?" he asked softly. She turned, a sad smile touching her lips. "Never. Whatever happens today, last night was—" She moved to him, touching his face. "It was worth everything." They prepared for the day like soldiers preparing for battle. Over breakfast, which neither had much appetite for, they strategized. Morrison would strike at the town's economic vulnerabilities. They needed to counter before noon. "The evidence against McKendry," Lydia said suddenly. "What if we could prove Morrison is connected to him, turn the tables?" Ethan considered. "McKendry's been too careful. But wait." He stood, pacing. "The payroll robbery, those expensive boots. Morrison wears custom boots from St. Louis, doesn't he? Kellerman and Sons. He was very particular about them." Her eyes widened. "You think he was here during the storm? That he and McKendry planned this together?" "Makes sense. McKendry provides local knowledge and muscle. Morrison provides Eastern connections and capital. They both benefit if the town fails. McKendry gets the water rights cheap. Morrison gets you back and probably a cut of the profits." "But how do we prove it?" A knock interrupted them. Nate stood on the porch, looking grim. "Marshal, we got problems. Half the town council's meeting at the bank. Word is they're discussing asking for your resignation to appease Morrison." "Let them discuss." Ethan strapped on his guns. "Nate, I need you to do something. Check the hotel register for the past month. See if anyone from St. Louis stayed there before last night." "You think Morrison's been here before?" "I'm betting on it. Also, wire the federal marshal in Tucson. Tell him we have interstate commerce violations, possible conspiracy to commit fraud." As Nate hurried off, Ethan turned to Lydia. "I need to confront McKendry, push him while he thinks he's winning. Men like him make mistakes when they're overconfident." "I'm coming with you." "Lydia, partners, remember?" She lifted her chin in that stubborn way he'd grown to love. Besides, I might recognize something. Some connection between them you'd miss. They rode out to McKendry's ranch together, the morning already growing hot. The compound seemed quiet, but Ethan noticed extra men in the shadows, rifles ready. McKendry received them in his study, all false hospitality. Marshal, Mrs. Cole, to what do I owe the pleasure? Just wanted to congratulate you, Ethan said casually. Masterful plan, bringing Morrison in, though I'm surprised you'd split profits with an Eastern partner. McKendry's eyes narrowed. I don't know what you mean. Sure you do. Ethan settled into a chair, uninvited. Morrison shows up right when you need maximum pressure on the town, threatens the railroad deal, gets everyone panicked. You swoop in as the savior, buy up the remaining holdings, control the whole valley. Morrison gets Lydia and probably a percentage. Everyone wins except the people who built this place. That's quite a theory. Marshal, prove it. Working on it. Ethan stood. Just thought you should know when this falls apart, and it will. I'll be coming for both of you. McKendry laughed. By noon today, you won't be marshal anymore. The town council's already meeting. Face it, Cole, you lost. Take your woman and run while you can. Actually, Lydia spoke for the first time. I have a question. Those boots Morrison wears, the ones with the silver heel plates. Did he leave a pair here? He's so particular about having spares when he travels. It was a shot in the dark, but McKendry's flicker of surprise told them everything. I don't know what you're talking about. No, then you won't mind if we look around, Ethan suggested. Get out, both of you, before I have you thrown out. As they left, Lydia whispered, He has them. I saw it in his face. Now we just need to get them. Ethan helped her mount, and we're running out of time. Back in town, they found chaos. The town council was indeed meeting. Voices raised in angry debate, audible from the street. The railroad investigators were packing at the hotel, and Morrison held court outside the bank, spinning tales of Lydia's crimes to anyone who'd listen. But there was also unexpected support. Doña Esperanza had organized the Mexican families, who stood quietly but firmly outside the jail, a reminder that they'd been here longest and wouldn't be moved by Eastern threats. Doc Avery was treating a suspiciously large number of ailments among the miners, keeping them in town instead of at work. Even some of McKendry's own men looked uncomfortable with the proceedings. Nate met them with news. Found it. Marshal Mr. S. Morrison checked into the hotel 2 weeks ago, stayed 3 nights, checked out the day before the storm. Get that register. Guard it with your life. Ethan turned to Lydia. I need you to do something brave. Braver than marrying a stubborn lawman. Despite everything, he smiled. Go to Morrison. Tell him you'll come with him if he calls off the threats. Buy us time. Her face went pale. Ethan. Trust me, I won't let him take you, but we need him distracted for the next hour. She kissed him, quick and fierce. 1 hour? Then you better have a miracle. Marshal Cole. Ethan watched her walk toward Morrison, back straight despite the fear he knew she felt. Then he turned to Nate. Get Doña Esperanza. Tell her I need the best tracker in the valley. Time to find those boots. What followed was the longest hour of Ethan's life. While Lydia kept Morrison talking negotiating terms for her surrender loud enough for the whole town to hear her apparent capitulation, Ethan rode hard with Miguel Esperanza, Doña's nephew and a man who could track a ghost across bare rock. They found what they were looking for in an arroyo 2 miles from McKendry's ranch, a cache of items hidden after the payroll robbery, including a pair of expensive boots with distinctive heel plates that matched the prints from the scene. More than boots here. Marshal, Miguel said, pulling out papers wrapped in oilcloth. Letters, between the Baron and someone in St. Louis. Ethan scanned them quickly, his grim satisfaction growing. Morrison and McKendry had indeed been partners, planning this for months. More, there was evidence of other schemes in other towns, a pattern of manipulation and profit. They rode back to town at a gallop, arriving just as the church bell struck noon. Morrison stood in the street with several hired guns, Lydia beside him looking pale but resolute. The town council had emerged from the bank, Mayor Patterson holding a document likely Ethan's dismissal. "Time's up, Marshal," Morrison called. "The lady's agreed to come home where she belongs. Stand aside." "Can't do that." Ethan dismounted slowly, Miguel beside him. "See, you're under arrest. Morrison. Conspiracy to commit robbery, fraud, extortion, the list goes on." Morrison laughed. "On whose authority you're not marshal anymore?" He gestured to Patterson. "Are you Cole?" Patterson stepped forward reluctantly. "Ethan, the council has voted for the good of the town." "For the good of the town. You might want to see this first." Ethan held up the letters. "Proof that Morrison and McKendry conspired to destroy Ash Fork for profit? Names, dates, plans all here in black and white." The crowd stirred, murmuring. Morrison's face darkened. "Those are forgeries. Desperate lies from a desperate man." "Really, then explain these." Ethan produced the boots. "Your custom boots. Morrison, same ones that left prints at the payroll robbery. You were here during the storm, working with McKendry. You can't prove those are mine." "Actually, I can." Lydia stepped away from Morrison, moving to Ethan's side. "Kellerman and Sons puts a serial number in each pair. I had to memorize it once when ordering replacements." She recited the number, then pointed to the inside of the boot. "That's your number? Samuel, I should know I paid for them as an engagement gift." The crowd pressed closer, anger building as understanding dawned. These outsiders had tried to destroy their town for profit. Morrison reached for his gun, but froze as a dozen weapons cleared leather, not just Ethan's and Nate's, but miners, ranchers, even some of McKendry's men who'd heard enough. "It's over," Ethan said quietly. "You're going to face justice, real justice, not the bought kind you're used to." "This isn't finished," Morrison snarled. "I have connections, influence." "Had," a new voice corrected. Everyone turned to see the lead railroad investigator stepping forward. "Mr. Morrison, you should know that your creditors in St. Louis have been very interested in your recent activities. Seems you've been playing similar games there, using other people's money. They're eager to discuss your debts and crimes in person." Morrison went white. In his arrogance, he'd overextended, left himself vulnerable. "Sarah, please." "My name is Lydia Cole," she said firmly, "and I'm exactly where I choose to be." The arrests happened quickly after that. Morrison and several conspirators were taken into custody. The evidence was overwhelming, especially when some of McKendry's men decided cooperation looked better than prison. But the real confrontation came an hour later at McKendry's ranch. Ethan rode out with a federal marshal who'd been nearby investigating rustling, along with a posse of citizens. They found McKendry trying to burn documents in his study. "Baron McKendry," the federal marshal announced, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit mail fraud, robbery of federal payroll, and about a dozen other charges we'll sort out at trial." McKendry looked at Ethan with pure hatred. "You think you've won?" "This town will dry up without my money, my influence." "Maybe," Ethan agreed. "Or maybe it'll grow into something better without your boot on its neck." As they led McKendry away, Garrison made one last play, going for a hidden gun. Ethan's shot took him in the shoulder, almost the same spot he'd shot Doyle weeks ago. Symmetry, of a sort. "You always did telegraph your draws," Ethan told the groaning man. "Something to work on in prison." The ride back to town was triumphant. Word had spread, and the streets filled with celebrating citizens. The railroad investigators, impressed by the town's unity in crisis, announced they would recommend full investment. The water rights would be redistributed fairly, the smaller ranchers protected. As sunset approached, Ethan found Lydia at their house, sitting on the porch steps. She'd changed from her formal dress into a simple calico, and he thought she'd never looked more beautiful. "It's over," he said, sitting beside her. "Is it?" She leaned against him. "Morrison has lawyers, connections. He might—" "He won't. The federal charges will keep him busy for years, and his creditors want their pound of flesh. You're free, Lydia. Truly free." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What happens now, our arrangement? The reason for it, that's all resolved." Ethan's heart stuttered. "Are you saying you want to dissolve our marriage?" She turned to him, eyes wide. "What, no? I'm asking if you still want to be married to me now that you don't have to be." He cupped her face in his hands. "Lydia Hart Cole, I want to be married to you for 100 reasons that have nothing to do with convenience or town politics. I want to wake up beside you every morning. I want to watch you teach music to tone-deaf children. I want to build a life with you, a real life, with laughter and arguments and babies and growing old together." Tears streamed down her face. "Babies." "If you want, as many as you want, or none, if that's your choice. I just want you." She kissed him then, pouring all her answer into the connection. When they broke apart, both breathless, she whispered, "I choose you too, today, tomorrow, always." They sat together as stars appeared overhead, the town settling into peaceful evening around them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, trials to prepare for, a town to continue building, a marriage to nurture from arrangement to true partnership. But tonight, Ethan Cole sat with his wife on their porch, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. They'd fought for this, for justice, for the town, for each other. And they'd won. Not through violence or revenge, but through courage, unity, and the kind of love that transforms convenient lies into precious truth. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "I love you too," she replied. Then, with a hint of her old mischief, "Even if you do make terrible coffee." He laughed, the sound rich and free. "Good thing I married a woman who knows how to make it properly." Good thing indeed. As the moon rose over Ash Fork, casting silver light over a town reborn, Ethan and Lydia Cole went inside their house, their true home now, to begin the rest of their lives together. Behind them, the porch steps still showed scuff marks from the day's drama. Ahead lay years of shared joys and sorrows, children's laughter and quiet evenings, the steady building of a love that had begun as necessity and bloomed into forever. The screen door closed softly behind them, and Ash Fork settled into sleep, safe in the knowledge that sometimes, against all odds, justice and love could triumph together. The weeks following Morrison's arrest passed in a blur of legal preparations and town rebuilding. Spring had fully arrived in Ash Fork, bringing wildflowers that painted the desert in unexpected colors. Ethan stood in the courthouse, watching as the circuit judge, an honest one this time, sent from Tucson, reviewed the evidence against McKendry and his conspirators. "Marshall Cole," Judge Webster said, peering over his spectacles. "This is quite possibly the most thorough case I've seen in 20 years. Your evidence is ironclad." "Had help, Your Honor. The whole town pitched in." "Yes, I've noticed. Remarkable unity." The judge shuffled papers. "Mr. McKendry, given the severity of your crimes and the federal charges pending, I'm remanding you to territorial prison to await transfer. As for your associates..." Ethan half listened as sentences were pronounced. His mind was on Lydia, who was teaching at the new school building, a proper structure now, funded by the recovered stolen money and railroad investment. She had been quiet lately, tired in the mornings, and he worried the stress of the trials was affecting her. After court adjourned, he found Nate organizing the prisoner transfer. The young deputy had grown considerably these past months, no longer the green kid who flinched at gunfire. "I can handle this, Marshal," Nate assured him. "Go home. Mrs. Cole looked a bit piqued when I saw her this morning. Ethan didn't need telling twice. He found Lydia not at the school, but at Doc Avery's office, emerging with an expression he couldn't quite read. Lydia, are you ill? She startled, then smiled a complicated smile full of secrets. No, not ill. Walk with me. They strolled toward home, Lydia unusually quiet. Finally, as they reached their porch, she said, Ethan, how do you feel about that conversation we had about babies? His heart skipped. I meant what I said. If you want children. Good. She took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. Because in about 7 months, you're going to be a father. The world seemed to stop. Ethan stared at her, then at where his hand rested, then back to her face. We're... Yes. Her smile turned tremulous. Are you happy? For answer, he swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed. Happy Lydia, He set her down carefully, suddenly worried. Should you be standing? Do you need to sit water food? What did Doc say? Doc said I'm healthy as a horse and to expect an autumn baby. She cupped his face. We're going to be fine. All 3 of us. That evening, as news spread through their circle of friends, their home filled with well-wishers. Doña Esperanza brought traditional herbs for morning sickness. Miss Palmer offered baby clothes she'd been saving. And even crusty Henrik Muller smiled as he promised a crib from his store. At cost, mind you, purely at cost. But the celebration was interrupted by unexpected visitors. A delegation from the town council, led by Mayor Patterson, arrived with serious expressions. Marshal, Mrs. Cole. Patterson began formally. We've come to discuss the future. Ethan tensed, but the mayor continued quickly. With McKendry's operation dismantled and the railroad bringing new settlers, we need strong leadership. The town council voted unanimously we want you as permanent marshal, with full backing and an increased salary suitable for a growing family. Additionally, Banker Morgan added, several of McKendry's former properties are being sold to satisfy his debts. The ranch house and 20 acres could be yours for a very reasonable price. The town needs stable families putting down roots. Ethan looked at Lydia, reading agreement in her eyes. We accept both offers. As the delegation left, Lydia leaned against him. A real home, our own land. It's more than I dreamed. You deserve every dream and more. He kissed her forehead. Though I'll miss this little house. We'll keep it. Rent it to newcomers, maybe. Or, she smiled mysteriously. Well, we'll see. The next morning brought the prisoner transfer. Ethan supervised as McKendry and his men were loaded into the prison wagon. The former baron had lost his commanding presence, looking older and smaller in chains. This isn't over, Cole, McKendry said as they secured him. I have friends. Influence. Had. Ethan corrected. Past tense. Your friends disappeared when the money did. As the wagon rolled away, Garrison made one last comment. You got lucky, Marshal. Next time. There won't be a next time. Ethan's voice was flat. You're done here. Make a new life somewhere else when you get out, or don't. But Ash Fork is closed to you forever. With the trials concluded and the conspirators gone, Ash Fork began to truly heal. The water rights were redistributed fairly among all residents. The railroad brought new businesses and settlers, but the town's character remained, shaped by those who'd fought for it. Ethan threw himself into preparing their new home. The former McKendry Ranch, now rechristened Sunrise Ranch. He worked alongside hired hands and volunteers, transforming the symbol of oppression into a place of hope. Lydia directed from the porch, her pregnancy progressing beautifully. One evening in late summer, as they sat watching sunset paint the mountains purple, she said, I want to tell you something about why I chose certain songs at the Silver Dollar. You don't have to. I want to. She took his hand. I sang about lost loves and broken dreams because that's all I thought I'd ever have. Music was my way of mourning the life I'd never live. But now, she placed his hand on her growing belly. Now I want to sing lullabies and songs of joy. I want our child to grow up hearing music that builds rather than mourns. Then that's what you'll sing. He pulled her close. Though I hope you'll still perform sometimes. The town would riot if you stopped entirely. She laughed. Perhaps, though I have a different idea. What if we started a proper music school, not just for children, but adults too? Mining families, ranch hands, anyone who wants to learn. Using part of the ranch? Why not? We have the space. And with the railroad. We could even bring in other teachers. Her eyes shone with possibilities. Imagine it Ash Fork known not just for cattle and silver, but for culture. For building something beautiful in the desert. It was a grand dream, but Ethan had learned not to underestimate his wife's dreams. Then we'll do it, though you might want to wait until after the baby. Ethan Cole. Women have been having babies and changing the world simultaneously since time began. But she softened the words with a kiss. Though perhaps I'll let you do the heavy lifting for a few months. As summer turned to autumn, the transformation of both ranch and town continued. The school building expanded, partially funded by an unexpected source. Judge Hancock, who'd fled rather than face charges, had left behind hidden assets that were seized and redistributed to the community. Doc Avery took on an apprentice, a young man from the East eager to learn frontier medicine. Nate Little was promoted to full deputy marshal and began courting Miss Palmer's assistant teacher, much to the town's amused delight. Even Reverend Hale, chastened by events, began preaching more about compassion and less about judgment. One crisp October evening, as Ethan helped Lydia organize sheet music for her students, she suddenly gasped, hand flying to her belly. Lydia. He was at her side instantly. I think... Oh, she gripped his hand. Ethan, the baby. It's time. What followed was the longest night of his life, bar none. Doc Avery and Doña Esperanza took charge, banishing him to pace the hallway like countless expectant fathers before him. Nate sat with him, trying to distract with town gossip, but Ethan heard none of it. Then, as dawn broke, a sound cut through his worry, the strong, indignant cry of a newborn. Doc emerged, smiling tiredly. Congratulations, Marshal. You have a daughter. A daughter. Ethan's knees nearly buckled. Lydia! Tired but perfect. Go on in. He found Lydia propped up in bed, hair damp with sweat but face radiant as she cradled a tiny bundle. She looked up as he approached, eyes bright with tears. Come meet your daughter. The baby was perfect, tiny, fists waving, face scrunched in newborn protest at the bright world. As Ethan took her carefully, she opened her eyes, her mother's eyes, and seemed to study him with serious consideration. Hello, little one, he whispered, and felt his heart break and remake itself all at once. I'm your papa, and I promise you, I will keep you safe and loved all your days. What should we name her? Lydia asked softly. They discussed names for months, but looking at this tiny person, only one seemed right. Hope, Ethan said. Hope Sarah Cole. Hope, Lydia repeated, smiling. Yes, that's who she is. As the sun rose fully, bathing their room in golden light, visitors began arriving. The house filled with friends bearing gifts and food, celebrating new life in a town that had learned to fight for its future. Doña Esperanza blessed the baby in Spanish and English, weaving protection with ancient words. Miss Palmer cooed over tiny fingers and promised music lessons when she's ready. Even gruff Henrik Miller went soft, presenting a beautifully carved rattle from the store's private collection. That evening, as the house finally quieted, Ethan sat in the rocking chair he'd built, Hope sleeping in his arms while Lydia dozed in bed. He thought about the journey that had brought them here from a marriage of convenience to save a reputation. through danger and discovery, to this moment of perfect peace. "Thank you," he whispered, not sure if he was addressing his wife, his daughter, or the universe that had granted him this impossible gift. Lydia stirred, eyes opening. "For what?" "For saying yes. That day I asked you to marry me for all the wrong reasons. For being brave enough to stay. For this." He gestured to their daughter, their room, their life. "Oh, my dear Marshall," she said with a sleepy smile. "Don't you know I was the one who got lucky? I found my way home," as if in agreement. Hope made a small sound in her sleep, tiny fist closing around Ethan's finger with surprising strength. And in that grip, Ethan felt the future challenges and joys. First steps and scraped knees, music lessons and birthday parties, all the beautiful complexity of a life fully lived. Outside, Ash Fork settled into evening, safe and prosperous under the stars. The silver dollar still did good business, though with a new singer now. The school bell would ring tomorrow, calling children to learn. The railroad brought new faces daily, people looking to build something in the desert, and in a ranch house that had once symbolized oppression but now stood for hope. A family began its story. Not the family any of them had planned, but the one they'd fought for, built from courage and convenience transformed into love. Ethan Cole, former Union soldier turned frontier marshal, looked at his wife and daughter and knew himself to be the richest man in Arizona territory. Not in gold or land or cattle, but in the currency that truly mattered: love freely given, trust hard won, and the promise of all the tomorrows they would face together. The lamp burned low as the night deepened, casting dancing shadows on the walls. And in that gentle darkness, with his daughter in his arms and his wife's hand in his, Ethan allowed himself to fully believe in happy endings. Not the storybook kind, neat and simple, but the real kind, messy and challenging and absolutely perfect. Hope stirred, making soft baby sounds, and Lydia hummed a lullaby, her voice carrying the same power that had once filled saloons but now blessed their home. It was a new song, one she'd written herself, about sunshine after storms and flowers blooming in unlikely places. And as his girl's music wrapped around him like a benediction, Marshal Ethan Cole closed his eyes and gave thanks for unlikely marriages, second chances, and the wild, wonderful way life could surprise you when you least expected it. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, it always did in the territory. But tonight, they were together. They were safe, and they were home. It was, he thought as sleep finally claimed him, more than enough. It was everything. 5 years had passed since that golden morning when hope entered the world. Ash Fork had grown from a dusty frontier town into a thriving community, with proper streets, a telegraph office, and even a small hospital that Doc Avery ran with his apprentice-turned-partner, Dr. Marcus Young. Ethan stood on the porch of Sunrise Ranch, watching his daughter chase butterflies through the garden Lydia had coaxed from the desert soil. At 5, Hope was a perfect blend of her parents, her mother's grace and music, her father's steady determination and sense of justice. "Papa, look!" Hope ran to him, cupping something carefully in her small hands. "A ladybug mama says they bring luck." "Your mama's usually right about such things." He lifted her onto his lap, admiring the tiny creature. "Gentle now. Living things need careful handling." "Like baby James," Hope referred to her 2-year-old brother, who was currently napping under Lydia's watchful eye. Exactly like baby James. Ethan smiled, remembering how seriously Hope had taken her role as big sister from the moment James arrived. The sound of horses approaching drew his attention. A small group of riders appeared on the ranch road, not the usual traffic for a Saturday afternoon. As they drew closer, Ethan recognized Judge Webster from Tucson, along with several men in city suits. "Hope, go find your mama. Tell her we have official visitors." As his daughter scampered inside, Ethan stood to greet the delegation. Judge Webster dismounted, his usually stern face creased with a smile. "Marshal Cole, beautiful spread you have here." "Thank you. Judge, what brings you to Ash Fork?" Though Ethan kept his tone pleasant, his hand instinctively checked the position of his gun. Old habits died hard. "Good news. Actually, gentlemen, may I present Marshal Ethan Cole, the man whose reports you've been reading." One of the suited men stepped forward, extending his hand. "Theodore Roosevelt, you, as Civil Service Commission, I've been most impressed with your work here. Marshal." Ethan shook the offered hand, recognizing the name. Roosevelt was making waves in Washington, pushing for reform and accountability. "Welcome to Ash Fork, Mr. Roosevelt. Please, call me Theodore. I'm here because we're implementing new standards for federal law enforcement positions. Your handling of the McKendree conspiracy has become something of a case study in Washington." Roosevelt's enthusiasm was infectious. "We need men like you training the next generation of marshals." Before Ethan could respond, Lydia emerged from the house, James on her hip and Hope holding her free hand. She'd developed an instinct for appearing just when needed, turning potentially tense situations into social occasions. "Gentlemen, welcome to Sunrise Ranch. You must be parched from your ride. Hope, would you help me bring refreshments for our guests?" As the women bustled about with Western hospitality, Roosevelt continued his pitch. "We're establishing a new training academy in Denver. I want you to consider a position as senior instructor. The pay is substantial, and you'd be shaping the future of law enforcement in the territories." Ethan glanced at Lydia, reading the tiny shake of her head. "I'm honored, truly, but Ash Fork is our home. My family's roots are here now." "I expected as much," Roosevelt said, not seeming disappointed. "A man who'd leave everything he's built would hardly be the man we need. So let me propose an alternative. Would you consider taking on federal marshal trainees here, a few at a time, learning real frontier law enforcement?" Now that was interesting. Ethan could see Lydia's slight nod from the corner of his eye. That could work. Ash Fork would be a good training ground. "Excellent." Roosevelt accepted a glass of Lydia's famous lemonade from Hope, who was clearly charmed by his exuberant manner. "We'll work out the details. But first, I must hear about this music school I've been told about." The rest of the afternoon passed pleasantly, with tours of both the ranch and the town. The Ash Fork Music Academy, as it was now formally known, occupied a converted barn and 2 new buildings. Students came from 3 counties away to study, and 2 of Lydia's former pupils had gone on to conservatories back east. As they walked through town, Ethan noted the changes with quiet pride. The Silver Dollar was now the Silver Dollar Theater, offering both musical performances and traveling shows. The school had expanded twice, with Miss Palmer as principal and 3 new teachers. Where McKendree's shadow had once fallen, new businesses thrived. They ended the tour at the town cemetery, where Roosevelt paid respects at a section Ethan always visited, a small grove set aside for those who'd helped build the town. Doña Esperanza rested there, having passed peacefully the previous winter, and beside her lay other pioneers who'd chosen community over personal gain. "A town's character shows in how it honors its dead," Roosevelt observed quietly. "And in how it protects its living," Ethan added, thinking of all the fights, large and small, that had brought them here. That evening, after the delegation had departed for their hotel, the Cole family gathered for their nightly ritual. Lydia played piano while Hope practiced her scales, and James banged enthusiastically on a toy drum. Ethan sat in his chair, pretending to read the newspaper but really watching his family. "You're thinking deep thoughts," Lydia observed, switching to a softer melody. "About Roosevelt's offer, about how different this all is from what I expected." He set aside the paper. "When I came to Ash Fork, I thought I was running from the past, never imagined I was running toward a future. Funny how that works." She began playing their song, the one she'd hummed that night 5 years ago when everything changed. Do you ever regret it staying here instead of taking opportunities elsewhere? Never. The answer came without hesitation. Everything I want is right here. Hope abandoned her scales to climb onto his lap. Papa, tell the story again, about how you saved Mama. I think your mama saved me, little bird. Tell it anyway. So he did, editing appropriately for young ears. How a marshal who thought his heart was too scarred to love met a singer who'd given up on dreams. How they'd married for all the wrong reasons and discovered all the right ones. How they'd fought bad men and worse odds to build something worth keeping. And then what happened? Hope asked, though she knew perfectly well. Then they had the most beautiful daughter in Arizona territory, Ethan said, tickling her until she giggled. And later, the most energetic son. And they lived happily ever after, Hope finished triumphantly. Most days, Lydia corrected with a smile. Some days we're tired and cranky and step on each other's toes, but that's real life, sweetheart. It's messier than fairy tales, but so much better. Later, after the children were asleep, Ethan and Lydia sat on their porch as they did most evenings. The stars spread above them like scattered silver. And somewhere in the distance, a coyote sang to the moon. Roosevelt's program will bring challenges, Lydia said quietly. Young marshals full of Eastern ideas, thinking they know better than frontier folk. Probably, but isn't that what we were once, outsiders trying to find our place? He took her hand, running his thumb over the simple gold band she wore. Besides, I learned from the best teachers sometimes outsiders see what needs changing. Flatterer, but she smiled. Speaking of teaching, I got a letter today from St. Louis. Ethan tensed, old protective instincts flaring. Morrison. No, he's still serving his sentence. This was from my old music teacher. She's retiring, wants to know if I'd like to purchase some of her sheet music collection for the academy. And I think I will, with my real name. She squeezed his hand. I'm not Sarah Jennings anymore. Haven't been for years, but I'm not hiding from her either. I'm Lydia Cole, who came from Sarah's ashes and built something new. Like the town, Ethan mused, rising from its old troubles into something better. Exactly like that. They sat in comfortable silence, each lost in thought. Then Lydia said, I've been thinking about Morrison's old threat, how he'd burn everything I cared about. He was wrong, wasn't he? He thought caring made us weak, but it made us strong. It gave us something to fight for. And people to fight alongside. Ethan thought of all their allies over the years. Nate, now a full marshal with his own territory. Doña Esperanza's family, who'd become their closest friends. Doc Avery, who delivered both their children, even Reverend Hale, who'd eventually learn to see beyond his prejudices. Ethan, Lydia's voice was strange. Look. He followed her gaze to see a figure walking up their road in the moonlight. As the person drew closer, Ethan recognized Miguel Esperanza. But something was wrong. The young man was supporting someone, half carrying them. Ethan was off the porch in an instant, Lydia close behind. As they reached Miguel, they saw his companion, a young woman, perhaps 16, with the unmistakable signs of hard travel and harder treatment. Marshal, Miguel panted. Found her on the road. She's looking for you. Says she needs help. That you'd understand. The girl looked up with desperate eyes. You're Marshal Cole, the one who helped the singer lady. Please, sir, he's coming for me, and I don't have anywhere else to go. Ethan exchanged a look with Lydia, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her face. Another runaway. Another woman fleeing a man who thought he owned her. The cycle continuing. You're safe now, Lydia said, stepping forward to put an arm around the girl. Come inside. We'll sort everything out. As they helped the exhausted girl into their home, Ethan felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders again, familiar now, almost comfortable. This was what they did, who they'd become. They stood between the bullies and the broken, offered shelter to storms both literal and metaphorical. Inside, as Lydia tended to their unexpected guest, Ethan stood guard at the window. Somewhere out there, another Morrison or McKendry was coming. Thinking might made right. They'd learned differently, just as all the others had. "Papa," Hope's sleepy voice came from the stairs. "Is something wrong?" "No, little bird. Just helping someone who needs it. Go back to bed. Like in the stories, like you helped Mama." "Something like that." Hope padded over to hug his leg. "Good, that's what heroes do," as his daughter retreated upstairs. Ethan smiled grimly. He was no hero, just a man who'd learned that standing up for others was the only way to live with himself. But if his children grew up believing in heroes, believing they could make a difference, then every fight had been worth it. Lydia appeared at his side. "She's resting, 16 years old, fled from an arranged marriage in California. The man's wealthy, connected. Sound familiar?" "Too familiar, but we've handled worse." "Yes, we have." She leaned into him. "Together." "Always together." As the night deepened around Sunrise Ranch, Ethan Cole stood guard over his family and the stranger they'd taken in. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as tomorrows always did. The man from California would come. Threats would be made. Stands would need to be taken. But tonight, in a house built on love and defended by courage, another soul found sanctuary. The music academy would open at dawn, filling the desert with melody. Children would learn their letters at the school. The town would bustle with honest commerce and community. And at the heart of it all, a marshal and his wife would continue their work, not the jobs they'd started with, but the calling they'd discovered, to stand for justice, to shelter the vulnerable, to prove that love could transform the most unlikely beginnings into the most beautiful endings. The windmill creaked its endless circle, drawing water from deep places to nourish the growing things above. Much like Ethan and Lydia themselves, two wounded souls who'd found each other in the desert and discovered that together, they could make even the driest ground bloom. As he finally headed to bed, Ethan paused to look in on his children. Hope slept with one arm flung wide, fearless even in dreams. James curled tight, thumb in mouth, secure in the knowledge that morning would find his world unchanged. They would grow up here. In this place their parents had fought to preserve and improve. They would know their history, the good and bad, the struggles and triumphs. And someday, when they were old enough, they would understand the most important lesson of all, that love wasn't just something you fell into, but something you built day by day, choice by choice, until it became stronger than any storm that might threaten it. "Coming to bed," Lydia called softly. "Coming," he answered, taking one last look at the desert beyond their walls. Ash Fork slept peacefully, watched over by stars and the spirits of all who'd sacrificed to make it home. Tomorrow, the work would continue. Tonight, Ethan Cole went to join his wife, grateful beyond measure for the unlikely path that had led them here. In the morning, they would face whatever came. Together, always together. And that, he knew with bone-deep certainty, made all the difference. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope you enjoyed following Ethan and Lydia's journey from a marriage of convenience to true love, through all the trials and triumphs of frontier life. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts about the story. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Night for more authentic Western romances. Hit that like button if this story touched your heart. And please press the hype button to help more listeners discover this video. Your support means the world and helps keep these stories alive. Until next time, partners.